All right, hello everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. Thanks for joining us at a little bit of an earlier time. So we typically do our webinars around 2:30 Eastern time, but we're super happy to have an earlier time today that allows us to accommodate an awesome guest that's based in the UK, which we'll get to when we introduce today's guest in just a minute. First, a couple of housekeeping notes. I'm Amy, I'm your host for today, and we are recording today's webinar. So everyone who registered will receive a link to the recording. That'll come to your inbox tomorrow morning, and we'll also be including some links to some additional resources that we cover in today's webinar. So keep a lookout for that. You can share that information, bookmark it so that you can revisit it, you can share it within your team. And second, we will have time for questions today. So as our guests are diving into the 5 habits of successful product-led companies, as a question comes up, just go ahead and type it into the questions box right there and go to webinar, and I will offer them up to our guests at the end of the webinar today. So without further ado, let's meet today's guests. I'm excited to be joined by Jacqueline Spangler from FullStory and Hannah Chaplin from Pendo. Jacqueline, want to get us started by introducing yourself?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Amy. So I'm Jacqueline Spangler, Director of Operations at FullStory. I joined FullStory about 4.5 years ago, and really I was the first customer-facing employee. So at that time, we had a team of engineers who were building this great product and spending time in the support queue to answer incoming tickets about bugs, feature requests. And I joined to start being a little more proactive with our customer communication and served as a pseudo success manager and operationalized our all-hands support model. But I bring this up because it was really important to the founders in our early days that whoever was talking to customers and understanding their pain also had a lot of influence on the product roadmap. And so my early days at FullStory were some combination of customer success, support, product management, and I helped to grow that team out to about 15 people. And we've always ensured that product improvement remained the core focus of our customer care team. So when I joined, I was number 15. We now have over 200 people at FullStory. And so at the beginning of this year, I stepped into a more internal role, working with our senior leadership team to make sure that as we scale and grow really quickly, we retain focus on operational excellence. So I'm kind of part of this webinar because being product-led really doesn't start with the product team always, right? You have to have some tops-down leadership support. And even in my time in customer success, we were very product focused as well. It doesn't really matter how much you want to come to work every day if you don't have a product anymore. So my current role, a big piece of my focus is to stay product-led in how I influence and build the operations at FullStory.
Awesome, thank you. And Hannah, can you tell us a little bit more about you?
Sure, that was a great introduction, Jacqueline. I really like that the customer's really at the forefront of everything there on like the operations side and the product side. And I guess similar to you, my background hasn't like really been in a product role. I've always started software companies, and my last organization, Receptive, dealt specifically with helping other companies bring the voice of the customer into product development and handle product feedback well. So I've also seen that kind of operational piece and how product-led growth spans and is important not just to the product team but the whole organization in many different ways. So yeah, we're both excited to share some kind of tips we've learned along the way, really.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm thrilled that we're going to have both of your perspectives to share today. So as we mentioned today, we're talking about some actual tangible tactics, habits, if you will, of product-led companies that any company can really adopt to start to elevate the role of the product within their organization, within their operations. So Jacqueline and Hannah are going to dive into those habits more in depth. But before we get started with that, I just wanted to zoom out and talk a little bit more about being product-led and what does that mean. So first, I'll just say that Pendo has a great guide on becoming product-led that goes into this idea in a lot more detail. And we're going to include a link to that in our follow-up email. I highly suggest that everyone take a look through that. It's really informative, really great information. But at a high level, being product-led really means that it's the product itself that drives growth, that drives customer satisfaction, that drives engagement, that drives expansion. It's at the core of what every team is doing. And it is driving a lot of those things itself. So when people log into your product and are using it, there's a lot of sort of self-supporting guidance, support. Customers can help themselves a lot. A lot of those things are really originating in the product. And really, if you think about it, for your customers, for your users, really, the people who are actually in your product every day, hopefully every week, this is largely true for them, whether you or your company are product-led or not. So because if you have a sales-heavy organization, the sale is happening often to just a handful of people who may not actually be the users of your product. And if your product experience is not good, it's really only a matter of time before those users will start to push back, either to their company, to their peers, and eventually customers jump ship, and you're opening up an opportunity for a more nimble company who is prioritizing that product experience to come in and disrupt your business. So really, becoming product-led is about putting the people and the processes and the platforms in place that enable you to actually align your business and your product with what your customers are wanting. So rather than your customers having an experience in your product that is sort of separate from the way that you're making your decisions in your organization, product-led is about making those be in total alignment. So that's what is going to allow you to actually, you can kind of see here, I won't talk through each of these points. And again, the Pendo's guide goes into this in a lot more detail, but having your people and your processes, again, that has to speak to operations. That's why I'm really excited Jacqueline here is to talk about that piece. And your platforms, your tools support the goals of understanding how your customers are using your product. That's what's going to allow you to innovate faster, to drive revenue through actual digital adoption, to have the data, have the feedback, have your roadmap, and build the customer loyalty that comes from the people who are actually using your software just being relieved that it's making their job easier rather than harder, that it's supporting the goals that they want to achieve. And it's allowing you to scale efficiently. You're not having to add employees linearly in line with customers added because your product is carrying a lot of that weight. So if you've got the people, processes, and platforms in place, your support and success are a lot easier. The product is easy to use. Customers can be onboarded and activated without a ton of personal hand-holding. Your feedback loops between support, success, sales, and the product are tied up nicely because everyone is working from the same set of data about the customer's product experience. So hopefully you're starting to get the point here about why we're so enthusiastic about this idea of being product-led. So there really are some important and advantageous efficiencies that being product-led opens up for your organization. And with all of that being said, there are still ways to take advantage of this way of thinking without needing to reorganize your whole company around this idea of product-led. And hopefully over time you find that starts to happen naturally, perhaps. But what we want to talk about today are these specific kind of concrete things that you can start to do to elevate the visibility of your product, the importance of your product within your organization, and gain some of the benefits, start to get to some of those outcomes that product-led companies enjoy. So let's dive in. Jacqueline, I think you're up first here to talk about this first habit.
Yeah, absolutely. So sharing product metrics at company-wide meetings. I know when I join a webinar, I always want to take things away that I can actually go use and do. And so your very first thought here might be, well, we don't have a company-wide meeting. So I did want to just clarify, like, If you don't have a company-wide meeting, you definitely have probably some sort of way to talk to the whole company. So it might be a meeting, but it could also be an email that goes out occasionally. It might be an intranet where you can post things, or even a Slack channel where, an all discussion channel where the whole company will see your message. So think about all of this given the forum that you have personally. But at FullStory, we do have a company-wide meeting every week on Friday afternoons, and it's really, we call it Hug It Out. And it's a time to just reflect on the week, get together as a company, toast our fellow coworkers on jobs well done, and share the progress that we've made on our goals. And it would be one of the recurring, we have an agenda, a set agenda for this meeting, and one of the items in that agenda is to share numbers. It'll be really easy in a meeting like this to just share kind of your standard numbers, right? Focus on metrics like pipeline or ARR or new customer logos. But we actually make sure that we use this time to share product metrics as well. So the metric for product might vary week to week, but we like to focus on how engaged users are with our product, or the key features that we've just launched, and how they're being used. But the most commonly shared metric we have is this example here, which is a North Star metric. And a North Star metric, there's other webinars on this if you need more information here, but at its root, a North Star metric is really just a key measure of success for the product team that defines the relationship between customer problem that you're actually trying to solve and the revenue that you're getting from that solving that customer problem. So at FullStory, we have weekly active explorers, and this metric shows us how often people, not only how often they're logging into the platform, but also then doing the next step, which is using search or segment, which is what we identified as our most sticky feature and the thing that gets the most value out of our product. And so you can see some other examples here from other companies, how they've identified their North Star metrics. So for Airbnb, nights booked on the platform, obviously that's measuring success for both sides, right? They have to both benefit the people who are renting rooms, but also the hosts who are giving their rooms out. I really like the Facebook example, monthly active users. This is a somewhat simple metric, right? And you may have measured this in the past, but a monthly active user showing that somebody actually logged in and used the product, rather than, they kind of drove ahead of MySpace back in the day because MySpace was just tracking that registered user. So that's a really key example that shows the difference between being product-led, where it's not just that you want to make the sale, but you actually want people to use the product because you know that long-term having them stick around is how you're going to stay in business as a company. So another just thing here to think about if you want to implement at your company, you don't have to start with a North Star metric. Maybe start with something simple like a daily active users. That is a pretty industry-wide standard metric. You might have a tool, you probably have a tool like Google Analytics that's already measuring this. And that'll make it even easier to get started with this habit of sharing product metrics, a number that you can already measure easily. But as you move forward, and that's actually exactly what we did at FullStory, but as we move forward, we found that daily actives wasn't really driving the behavior change we needed for the product. And so we tweaked it and figured out exactly what was right for us to show us that, to actually kind of paint a roadmap for different features that we needed to change if we wanted to make sure that people were logging into the product and then doing specific actions.
Awesome, thanks. And Hannah, habit number 2, do you want to take this one?
Yeah, so that leads nicely on to kind of habit 2, which is very similar to Jacqueline in a lot of ways. So this is about like using data as a common language. So as Amy outlined so nicely, being product led is about the whole organization and every team being supported by your product. And I find that one thing that works really well, no matter how big your organization is or how developed you are, is just having some data to help with your decisions, basically. So here at Pendo, one of our core values is show me the data. I've got that cheeky little quote in there. I'm sure we've all heard it. If we have data, let's look at data. If we all have our opinions, let's go with mine. And I think that's the situation we find ourselves in a lot of the time, no matter which department you're in. A lot of things can happen on gut feeling, especially when you're growing fast. You've got customers screaming for stuff, trying to work all these things out very quickly. And very often just having some data to bring to that conversation makes all the difference, and it puts you on the same footing. And when I was talking to Christina about this, who is in the marketing team at Pendo, she said that phrase, like, data is a common language, and that's a really, really nice way to kind of think about things. So at a very practical level, let's run some examples through. So obviously feature usage, if you've got a way to track how people are using your product, then you can see where they might need some additional help. You might find a problem in a workflow, and to kind of figure out how to improve that, you need a kind of starting point. And product feedback is another real core area of this for me as well, when it comes to, you know, deciding what should be on your roadmap next. Like customer success and support teams often champion the voice of the customer and have all the customer feedback. You've got sales team, on the other hand, who are requesting things that prospects might need, and internally you've got your own strategy for the product as well. So what I've always done, and what we do a good job of here at Pendo, is like understanding the feedback data. Who has it come from? Is it our core persona? What's the ARR associated? What's the product area associated with that? And that just gives you like a really, really nice place to kind of start those discussions from. So definitely, like, regardless of which kind of team you're in, just get into that mindset of like, okay, where's the data to back this up? How can I get a good discussion going? Like, you do need that data. And I'd like to stress, it's not about doing exactly what the data tells you, regardless of what type it is. It's about just having it there to form the basis of the discussion, and then you can find a good way forwards. So that would be my definitely a good habit that I would love to pass on. Always get the data in place, then you can go ahead and find a good way forwards.
Yeah, I love that. It really, sorry, go ahead, Jacqueline.
Sorry, I just I love what Hannah is saying, and I noticed that your next norm here is to be transparent. And I like, if you've got the data, regardless if you're able to show it at a company-wide meeting or not, have access to it, right? Or wire up your tools to pump the data into Slack, right? So that the whole company is exposed to it more and more often and can see how they can work together.
Definitely. You don't, it's not something you have to, like, these kind of like cultural things that we all rally around at Pendo is something that was, you know, this was put in place like when the company had just started out. So it's definitely a takeaway from, you know, even if you're starting your company today or you're very early stage, like having these things in place to kind of form a strong culture from day one really helps.
Yeah, absolutely. And just to sort of underscore that point, Hannah, is, you know, this is one of the underlying sort of attributes, characteristics of product-led companies, is that their actions are going to be data informed. So in the past, perhaps product management leaned a lot more on hunches and intuition and previous experience, and all of those are good and important. And like you said, Hannah, will come into play as well. But when you can lean on actual facts, data, undisputable information as a jumping off point, it allows you to get much more done in that conversation and in your organization as a whole, because you don't have to spend a lot of time at that base opinion level of, you know, questioning whether the premise itself is even true. You know that the premise is true, whatever it is. If it's, you know, we're not seeing a ton of engagement here, or this many people are struggling with this aspect of our product and not engaging, or this many people are engaging. Or I know one of the functionalities that Pendo offers is letting people vote on new features and things like that. And to have that data then allows you to have a much more productive conversation that brings in your experience and your intuition, but is based on something that is undisputable. And I think people would really be surprised at how that transparency and having that data starts to naturally drive curiosity and empathy and real change within your company.
Yeah, it makes everyone a lot more open, definitely. And people take not necessarily the approach of this is what I think, so we'll go with this, but it's more like this is what I think, let's test that and find out. I think that's for product-led organizations to move quickly. That's a really, really nice approach.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so on to habit number 3. Jacqueline, this one is you again.
Yeah, and so elevating product goals to the company level, this is where, as a person in operations and not in product specifically, I think a lot about how do we rally the entire company and align. Kind of a lot of the previous slides have talked about this. How do you make sure that everybody understands that making the product better is actually the goal to success for your company? At FullStory, we use OKRs, and OKRs, if you're not familiar with them, they're something that were started at Intel, but they were really popularized when John Doerr took them from Intel, where he had learned them, to Google, which was sort of this young scrappy company with a bunch of brilliant engineers. And he said, guys, you can make a lot more strategic progress by having objectives and key results. That's what OKR stands for. And he has a nice little acronym. So OKRs are just the facts: focus, alignment, commitment, trackable, progress, and stretching. So at FullStory, OKRs are really how we plan for progress, and they create a framework for coordination. So basically, leadership can clearly define goals, call those objectives, and then the company, the rest of the company, ICs and managers, everybody on the floor, can define the work that needs to be done to reach those objectives, because they're closer to the problem and they can see it a little bit more clearly. So overall, this system really encourages autonomy and scales execution. But with this focus on top-down goal setting and bottoms-up execution, having a product goal within your company OKRs is a really great way to ensure the whole company is rallied around product improvement. So when leadership elevates a product goal, each team then has to think, how can I help make that product goal true? So for example, if you're gonna build and launch a new feature, perhaps that's one of your objectives. That might generally be like, oh, that's in product world, the rest of the company doesn't need to think about it. But if you use OKRs to say, okay, our objective is to build and launch this feature, now you've required each team within the company to think, how can they contribute to that goal? And so sales might have key results around getting certified to sell that new feature, make sure that they really understand the value. Or maybe sales puts a goal, a key result on the board to collect X number of pieces of feedback from their prospects specific to the value we're trying to solve with this new feature, so that we can make sure that we're getting good customer feedback in the pipeline. Success and support might have key results around the usage stats after launch, or decreasing troubleshooting issues by reporting the bugs and UX issues right after the launch. And then maybe marketing can align their launch materials to specific usage metrics for that new feature rather than just views and clicks. So I know, again, that not everyone uses OKRs, but the key point here is really, how can product metrics and goals be represented at a company level? And then what systems or processes can you implement to ensure that you have org-wide visibility and commitment to those product success? And I think, Hannah, you're going to talk a little bit about this in a non-OKR lens.
Yeah, no, it's very similar. I think it's just like different wording. So what we do here at Pendo is, we were there last week actually. At the end of every quarter, we have like a planning session, and I'm sure, again, companies of all sizes do this, right? Like even when we were a tiny, scrappy startup, when there was 2 of us, you've got to set your goals and know what you're aiming for. So if you don't have that, go and definitely get those in place. But we take a very similar approach. And if your company, like, it's funny, isn't it? In some companies, we're very product led. We were talking about this the other day, like at FullStory and at Pendo, we're all kind of the product mindset. And that's not always true depending on what industry you're in. So if you're in a product role and you're struggling to get visibility of product and what it can do for the organization and how it can support the rest of the teams, I think a really, really nice way to go about it is, seek out the goals that have been set for the organization. You might have to go up to your manager, or they might, I don't know, it depends. You might have to go up to manager and find out, but get behind those company goals. And then if you're on the product team, figure out what initiatives and projects you can do to back those up. And that, I can guarantee, that will get you attention. So as an example, we were setting the goals for Q4, and then we had a little kind of get together as the product team, and we went through each of the company goals and thought about, okay, how can the product and how can we as the product team help the company achieve its goals, and in turn support the goals of our customers and give them the value that they need. So some examples I had, it can be a real wide range of things. I've got things such as, it could be as simple as a feature release. In order to meet this goal in this product area, product team need to ensure that this feature gets released on time. It might be a piece of content marketing that comes up quite regularly, how the product team can support an initiative by being more active in marketing. Or like Jacqueline, similar to you with product feedback as well, if something's about to go into beta, if you need to make sure that that's successful, how do you get a good loop between customer feedback and feeding that back to engineering, and then in turn, once that's released, how do you track all of the kind of usage? So yeah, it's definitely, I think that's a really good product-led habit to get in place, regardless of the size, as I keep saying. Understand the company goals and get the product to support them.
Yeah, I love that, especially, to echo your point of, if you're not at a place where company goals are naturally the same as product goals or including product goals, a great way to start to increase the trust and the engagement with your product team is exactly what you're saying, to have the product team take the company goals and say, okay, here's how we're going to support, and this is what we're planning to do. And then maybe from there, you sort of, that evolves into, we might need some support from marketing on this, or from support and success on these product goals. And you can sort of come at it from that direction.
Yeah.
Okay, so habit number 4, this one I'm excited to hear about. Hannah, do you want to talk us through creating a product feedback policy?
Oh, this is my favorite. I love this one. It's so simple, but it's honestly, this is the most effective thing I've seen in a long time. So one place that I think a lot of us fall down is being clear on product feedback. So the world we're living in, everybody has product feedback. Customers want to be heard. They want their voice in development, and in fact, that's a real differentiator if you're operating in a very busy market. It's about giving customers a good experience, making sure that they're heard, and that all of that amazing feedback that customers have, because they're using your product day in and day out, just making sure it doesn't disappear into a black hole, because that's miserable. It's miserable for everyone. You're not using the data, customers feel ignored. Not cool. So I've seen a lot of organizations start to put a product feedback policy in place, and we're going to share a template round at the end. But the way to think about it is like a support SLA. What the policy does is, it's a document that you might share it in your help site, on your marketing site, and it just tells your customers and your teams internally where to give you product feedback, what the product team actually do with it, and then how you will communicate back. And it is honestly that simple, but doing that adds a load of transparency around your product development. It makes sure the customers are heard. It makes sure that product team are getting all of that wonderful feedback data in one place, and then they can actually use it. And when you're getting good feedback, you can make good product decisions. And when you start combining that with actual usage data, then you're in a really, really good place. So you don't need anything fancy. We use, obviously, Pendo Feedback does this for us, it automates it all. But in the early days, we literally had a spreadsheet. But yeah, we'll send a template round. Productfeedbackpolicy.com is the little website. So, oh yeah, this is the key part for me, actually, is closing the feedback loop and getting rid of the black hole. And Jacqueline, I'd love to hear what you do for this afterwards. But here's some kind of like quick examples of ways that you can add some transparency and alignment to the product process. So the first one is, like, this is really simple, just share releases in app. It amazes me how often team members and customers can like miss what you've actually done, what you've released, and what you've worked on. So in-app messaging works really nicely. If we go to the next one, just keep communication like super simple. So what we do here, which works really well, you don't have to share, like a massive, sprawling, complicated roadmap. Simply showing customers what's coming up and what you're building is often enough. It works a treat. And this is actually really good internally as well. Like if CS teams and sales teams know what products are working on, it puts them in a really good place to be aligned and to communicate back to customers as well. This scares a lot of people. I'd love to hear your Jacqueline, what do you think about sharing a roadmap?
That's a tough one. That's a really tough one. I think with OKRs, you know, we keep a little bit loose, right? Because we always feel like our future self is smarter than our current self. But I love the idea of you create a little bit of accountability for yourself, right? If you share a roadmap. And I think probably and I'll hear what you say, but you know, if you start with, okay, in the next 60 days or the next quarter, like we can be really specific and concrete. And then after that, we'll say it's more like a 50 to 70% chance rather than like definitely going to happen.
Yeah, definitely. I love that. So some best practice around roadmap is that sort of thing. So that I can't see it too well on this screen, but basically this is like the real Pendo feedback roadmap that we share with our customers. And we have what's being worked on right now, because like you said, Jacqueline, we know because it's being worked on, or at least the engineers tell me it is. And then things that are like further out than that. This is a really good opportunity to start getting the voice of the customer into projects you're thinking of working on. I think often when we think about bringing the customer into development or customer feedback in particular, it feels like it's all this opinion and data like flowing into the product team. But I definitely advocate for you know, doing something like this, pop some projects on you're thinking of and be like, hey, customers, this is where we're thinking of going next. Can you put your use cases on so we can review that data? So done in the right way, it is amazing. And I also don't just have one roadmap, I have an internal one as well, which has a lot more detail and a lot of like under the hood projects, like if we're working on like something around scaling or some tooling up internally that helps us do a good job. Like customers really don't need to know about that stuff. So done carefully, I'd highly recommend it.
I like that a lot. And Hannah, do you find that when you're able to increase some of that transparency for the more immediate things, again, speaking to sort of the flexibility that Jacqueline mentioned with OKRs, do you find that when you are transparent with that and you welcome feedback from your customers and use cases, that actually gives you even more data that you might use to shift your priorities to be even more in line with your customers' needs with your product?
Oh yeah, absolutely. So I always look at customer feedback because they're especially good at picking up on all the small improvements that you can usually implement, you know, pretty quickly, you know, to features that you've already got in your product. But then I also look at data from the sales team as well, from prospects, because often that's very different. And when you find areas of overlap, then that's often an indicator that it's a pain point that you need to kind of drill down into. But I basically combine what customers need with what like prospects are saying, and kind of tie that again back up to the company goals. So if you had a project to kind of sell more to more enterprise organizations, you might look at, you know, what are enterprise customers saying, how are enterprise customers using the product today, what are enterprise prospects wanting, and that sort of thing. It's through combining all those little bits of data that you can start to, you know, really get confident and comfortable around what you should be kind of working on next.
Yeah, awesome. I love that. And again, one of those, you know, product-led attributes or characteristics that is underlying these habits specifically, and, you know, all of these habits really largely, is this idea of accountability. So in this context, that's driving accountability across your organization for the product experience, and also stepping up as a product team to say, this is what we're going to be accountable for. Here's what we are sort of offering up as how we're going to support our company goals, what we're going to build in the next, you know, quarter, cycle, whatever the case may be. And yes, you know, it's true also that in the same way that product feedback is everyone's responsibility, the customer experience and the product experience is everyone's responsibility as well. So when you do make customers and other internal teams accountable for that, whether that's company level goals or bringing them in and trusting them to provide that feedback, and then showing that you're taking that feedback seriously. The product itself really starts to become a whole company effort. And some of these images here are sort of pulling from FullStory and Pendo, how we increase that accountability across the organization.
And
okay,
actually,
so, oh, go ahead.
sorry, a couple things that I thought of while Hannah was talking, like from an operational perspective, I love that concept of accountability, right? And Hannah, you mentioned like having an SLA basically for your customers, saying like, well, we're going to do something with your feedback, right? And one thing, operationally that can make this really effective is like customers love to hear, they just like it to be resolved, right? You may have decided to do something or you may have not decided to do something. And one way we do that here at FullStory is we tie feedback to tickets. And so we always go back, once a ticket is closed, we can go back to everybody who wrote in about that feature and say, hey, we did this. And it just makes people so happy, even if it's a full year later, right? The fact that you recognize that they asked for something and you let them know when it happened. We've gotten, I think, a lot of really nice feedback when we've done that, and I think customers really appreciate it. And then the other thing I was going to say is, if you've already tried to do something like this at your company and it hasn't taken off, I would recommend, just making sure that you're finding people in the tools where they already live every day. So we've done several iterations of this at FullStory, and probably the most successful one is when we said, hey, sales, you already live in Salesforce, we'll let you give your prospect feedback in Salesforce, right? And so everybody kind of can use the tool that they want and that they're most comfortable in, and then we tie that back together elsewhere for the product team. So a couple of just operational tips of maybe how to make this work if you've tried it before and it hasn't been going well.
Yeah, they are brilliant points, and I like what you're saying about how much customers appreciate it, because we find as well, even if we're not going to build something, just telling people we're not going to build this like ever, and this is why, actually that's great. That's a really good customer experience. A good customer experience isn't about doing everything every customer asks. It's about being controlled, reviewing the information, and building the product that adds the most value to the customer base. So yeah, I love those operational points. We exactly the same here, very, very similar.
Yeah, and you just build so much trust, with honesty. So crazy how that works.
Definitely.
Yeah, that's true. Okay, great. Well, we have made it to habit number 5. Jacqueline, I think you're going to kick this one off.
Yeah, so this is, I feel like this habit sort of sounds similar to what we've been saying so far, but the idea is always just make sure that the whole company understands the product. And so we've talked about the data and the metrics and the feedback, but what about the actual product itself? Do you have habits or things that actually make you get into the product and use it on an ongoing basis? And really one of the reasons that FullStory exists is because our founders initially were trying to build something else and they couldn't figure out why nobody was using it. And they built FullStory one weekend so that they could actually understand how were users engaging with the product that they were trying to build previously. And once they could see how people were using it, they had so much empathy. This is a real picture from one of our customers doing something that we call game film. But one of the key features of FullStory is session replay, and that's where you can see a recreation of a user experience to know where they stumbled, where they ran into bugs, and hopefully maybe where they had success. And we've found time and time again that having this visual representation of user frustration or a user not being able to accomplish the thing that you meant them to accomplish in your product is so much more powerful than just a graph when trying to evoke empathy and action even. When an engineer sees a bug that they wrote affecting a real live person, they want to fix it immediately. So empathy is a company-wide emotion, right? You don't have to be on the product team to understand why poor user experience or user interaction and product functionality is bad for business. As a seller, you understand. As a success person, you understand. As a marketer, you understand. Like nobody can watch somebody struggle in a product without being empathetic to that experience and wanting to make it better. So we use, like I said, something called game film. It's a concept that comes from sports. So if you enjoy sports ball, you might be familiar with this idea. But game film generally is, coaches and players watch video of the actual game after the weekend, right? So Sunday NFL game, on Monday, the players and coaches are in the locker, or not the locker room, but they're in an office somewhere watching the film of the game, and they're picking it apart, right? They're analyzing everything, the good, the bad, and the ugly that happened on the field during that game. They celebrate the good stuff, and then they identify key things that they can improve in their next game. And so we do basically the same thing with FullStory sessions. So we choose usually a recent feature that we've launched, and we look to focus on watching sessions where people were interacting with that feature. And almost instantly, you can see where your hunches and guesses about interaction were wrong. So you can see what you can improve. And everyone at the company can participate in game film. So sometimes we have it kind of in our all hands meeting space, or we'll book a really large conference room, and anybody who's available can come in and be part of the game film experience. And we'll track winces and wins during that time. So we try to improve our wins metric, right? So how many times did you go, ooh, that looked bad? And then can you go back and fix those bugs and then do another game film session and have fewer winces? I think on the next slide, Amy, these are actually some examples of our customers who have used game film. This is something that we support. We actually send out a package for game film, but a lot of people just organically figure it out themselves and don't know that it's a concept that we have named game film. So at Wistia, this is a great quote where they were trying to improve their onboarding flow for a really long time. And they thought, okay, our activation rate going up a little bit, but they wanted to remove more friction. And so the main thing that changed that for them was just every single Friday, they would order lunch and get in a conference room and watch actual people use the product. And they learned really quickly what they could fix. So yeah, I think that's a good habit, is to use your own product and then see other customers or see other users using your actual product and see, are they being successful?
Yeah, absolutely. And the sort of underlying thing here again, and what's being driven by that, like empathy and these things that build a visceral understanding of what it's like for your customers to be in your product, what your product experience is like, is this idea of collaboration. So, and this really fits in again with kind of all of the habits we've mentioned, but it speaks to the ability to drive that cross-team collaboration. And so the images we're using here are a few of the ways that at Pendo and at FullStory we do this. So Hannah talked a little bit about NPS responses, customer feedback. You can have that go right into a visible Slack channel, highly visible, highly trafficked Slack channel, and it just starts to pique that sort of curiosity about, oh, well, what is that experience like? And actually now with the new FullStory and Pendo integration, you can even click on a session link and jump into that customer session to get a little bit more information. And it's just a great way to start to drive that natural curiosity that leads to the cross-team collaboration that is going to help you start to build a better product and find that your product and your product experience more and more are behind the sort of success and the goals that you're setting for your company. So any final thoughts on any of these things, Jacqueline and Hannah, before we move on to questions?
I would just like to say I really like what you said, Jacqueline, about empathy. I think that really, really is a key thing. And that's something I think we do a really good job of here as well, because we're in a similar position. We're very lucky in that we can use our product to help us understand our customers, so we in turn can help them. So we'll look at the usage data, and if we spot that someone's struggling somewhere, we can put some guides in place to help basically guide them through the area that they're stuck on. And we review that. Our product operations team, which is relatively new here, but that's do you have product operations, Jacqueline?
No, actually, it's a concept we're talking about right now. So we might have it soon, and it will be relatively new for us too.
Yeah, it's been really interesting watching that unfold. So that's kind of like so it's like that layer that sits over like engineering, customer success, and product, and Christine, she's done a fantastic job of leading it here, and she'll look at like the feedback data, she'll help kind of link up all the teams together, and that role, I think, we're going to see more and more of that in the coming months, and especially into next year. I think now that we've got all, we can see how our customers are using the product, we've got the usage data, we can capture feedback well. This whole like products and this operational layer in product is going to really help move companies along, I think.
Yeah, I'm really excited about the concept too. And then when I think about just all of the habits, right, why would product ops need to exist? It's because I think as you start to focus on data like this more often and talk about it at a company level, you realize there is so much to be done, right? So you don't just want to wait for your largest prospects or customers to say, if you build this feature, I'll buy it, because that's gonna, take you in the wrong direction every time. But if you can really be proactive in your product operations and your feedback, right? And taking all that information, it's all there for you, right? There's a ton of data out there to be had. And if you can just be really proactive with it, that's what really turns you into a product-led company. And so, yeah, it's funny that you mentioned product ops. I think that is probably, as companies become more and more product-led, they realize that there is this kind of nascent role that's developing, because now we've got to make sure that we take the best possible advantage of all the data that we're collecting.
Exactly, and again, that all adds up to back to like the heart of it is about giving customers a really good experience, which is what we all want to do.
Absolutely.
Awesome. All right, so let's jump into questions now, since we have about 10 minutes left. So we have a couple questions here. One relates to what we were just talking about, Jacqueline, about game film. So I wanted to get to that one first. And Claire asks, what do you use to capture game film? So maybe if you can talk a little bit more about that.
Right. So FullStory itself is how we run game film. So these are recorded sessions of our users. And then there was, I think on the slide, there's a picture of this sheet that we have where we can, you can actually use it like scorecards and have everybody who's in the room write on there like whence or when. So that's one way you can do it. I think that when we take when we're having like a really specific, we just launched a feature and we're watching game film for that new feature launch, we'll just have our project management system open. We use Clubhouse, but if you have Trello or Jira or whatever it is you might be using, we'll file bugs directly from the FullStory session, or we'll create new cards and ideas, or we'll capture everything in a spreadsheet. You can do it a lot of different ways. It's just kind of whatever makes the most sense for your company. But I think it's more about like, what are you actually going to do with that information? If you're definitely going to fix everything that you see, just file the live cards. If you're going to kind of consider what you saw, I would just type notes in a doc as you go, and then you can collate that after and say, what were some patterns that we saw and what's a higher level thing we could fix?
Yeah, and it could be sort of a jumping off point for where you go back to the data to see, how can you back up some of these things to see the true broader impact.
Yeah.
Awesome. And then a couple questions here, Hannah, about sharing your roadmap. So,
thought there might be.
Yeah. So one of the concerns here that we sort of touched on is that transparency with your roadmap, especially if you're in, maybe a highly regulated or a higher risk B2B environment. It could create some tension, some problems, some risk if you share that you're committing to features and exposing that externally, and then end up having to push back dates or change priorities. Could result in something like contracts being ended or relationships ending. So I wanted to, I guess the question here is, does this work in these environments? Is there a way to approach this that mitigates that risk a little bit, in your opinion?
I think it's one of those things, while I'd advocate for sharing a roadmap like along the lines that I described earlier, it really isn't right for everyone, and I see quite a broad spectrum of how much people are willing to share. And also, I think with roadmaps as well, I wouldn't share them like publicly. Some companies do that. I think sharing a roadmap with customers, the smart move, but I've never shared a roadmap like publicly on, just on the internet or anything like that. But yeah, of course, you do have to go careful, and it isn't, like I say, it isn't right for everybody. So just use your judgment and do what's right for your company and your product.
Yeah, I think that makes sense.
I was going to ask, like, how do you phrase things? Is it we will build this exact feature, or is it we'll solve this goal?
Exactly.
That will give you a little bit of looseness, right?
Yeah, exactly. So like, as an example, I know there was a load of Q3 stuff we were working on, and it was in production, and they're, by that point the requirement's very well defined, so I'll happily say, hey, this is what's being worked on right now, and don't give a release date, but this is what's in production right now. And then the other projects, like anything going into Q4, it's very loose. It's like, we're going to look at how we can make reporting more effective for you. What are your use cases? How can we help? We're about to move into planning. It's that sort of vibe. It's not like we are releasing this feature. It's more problem based, and it's more exploratory, and there are no hard dates.
Awesome, that's really helpful. And then another question sort of related to that is, do you find that sharing the roadmap conflicts with the desire to be flexible? We kind of touched on this a little bit, but could showing it and then changing it create negativity, frustration? How do you sort of mitigate that?
I think that's down to the time. I think, Jacqueline, you said the same thing, didn't you? Like, stuff that's very near term that's being worked on. If you're comfortable, you can share it, but yeah, I would definitely steer away from hard commitments to specific features by set dates.
Right. I think you can give sort of, levels of assurance, right? So like in the next quarter, 100%, these are the things that are coming out. Looking forward 2 quarters, like 50% confidence rate that these are the things we would be working on. I think that's one way to mitigate that a little bit.
Yeah, so keep it high level, definitely.
Awesome. And then this one I think will be pretty quick. When you're handling an external and an internal roadmap, does the internal have everything the external does plus the internal tools, or just internal tools?
Got it. So the customer one is, like we were just talking about, a lot more high level, a lot more about let's find pain points around this area we might tackle next. Whereas internally, it's a lot more structured, because the internal roadmap I've got for Pendo feedback, that gets reported up to like the exec level. So again, it's about finding what works for you, and what's worked well for us is like things we were tidying up. Like Pendo feedback was launched in September, so we've got a stream or a theme of work that's all the tasks where and features that we need to tidy up basically from launch. We've got like net new functionality that's been spec'd out, and then we've got some like behind the scenes admin stuff we're kind of working on. And it's important to flag that because it's engineering resource being used basically. So think about your audience and just ask people. So I basically went to Todd, who's the CEO. I was like, hey, how can I best communicate what feedback's doing? What do you want on the roadmap? And we settled on the best themes to show. So again, I think it's about creating transparency in the right way and doing what's right for the teams in your and customers that you have personally.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
Okay, I think sorry, go ahead, Jacqueline.
Sorry, I was just going to mention, kind of, maybe this is the previous question, but just thinking about how flexible you want to be. I think that's going to change a lot. And Hannah, you've started companies and you've worked at larger companies, and as a much younger, if you're a very young company, you probably want to optimize for flexibility. And as you get larger and have a larger engineering and product team, you probably want to optimize for a little bit more assurance and accountability around things that you said you were going to do, and get in a good habit of being able to accomplish those things.
Awesome. Yeah. And final question here, as we are running out of time, but these have been great questions, and any questions we didn't get to, I'll make sure we follow up with some more information. So this is great question about product feedback policy, Hannah, that you might be able to speak to, which is how do you sort of guide your internal teams especially, and maybe we often run into this problem with a team like sales, which is what she mentions, but how do you guide them to make sure that the feedback that you're getting is really actionable and leaves the information that you need to kind of rectify that, as opposed to just like, you know, this is a feature request and you're not getting a lot of context, like what is the customer's actual problem as opposed to just the feature. Is there guidance in sort of the product feedback policy for doing maybe some education or some leading questions that ensure that you're getting feedback that's really helpful?
Yeah, that's a great point, because if you're in product, we all know that you can have 10 people asking for the same feature and they all mean very, very different things. So yeah, you can absolutely put best practices in the feedback policy that you share internally and with customers. But the other thing we do at Pendo as well is the way we capture feedback is like within Pendo itself. So as part of the resource center, you get the option to give feedback. And then we've made sure that right from day one, we're getting good information by just designing the feedback form. So if someone goes to give feedback to Pendo, there's a number of questions. We don't just ask, what feature do you want? We ask, what's your pain point? Do you have a workaround for this? Do you have a good proposed solution? And it just adds a lot of colour and context, which the product team can then use to kind of take into their planning. Because I'm a big advocate for collecting data from people, but then the product team, they're the ones that should be designing the solution. So think about the data that's going to help you the most, collect that up front when the feedback's submitted, and then let the product team be empowered to own how they solve that problem.
Wonderful. Yeah, I think that's super helpful. And yeah, we are out of time. Thank you guys, Jacqueline and Hannah. Thank you so much for joining us, for sharing these insights into these habits about driving this kind of product-led mindset, whether your whole organization is bought into that idea yet or not. As I mentioned at the top of the webinar, we are recording, and we will send a link to the recording out tomorrow, along with links to many of the resources that we mentioned in the content here today. And I think that's all we have. Thanks everyone so much. Have a great day.
Thank you so much. You too.
Thank you. Yeah. Bye.
Bye.